Welcome to this food preservation video, a collaborative project between Little Priest Tribal College and Nebraska Extension. The popularity of canning has been increasing. It does take time and work to can, but the results are worth the effort. My name is Carol Larvick, Extension Educator in Food Nutrition with the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Today we will walk through the steps to canning in a boiling water canner. Let's begin by understanding what foods we can safely process in a boiling water canner. Those foods include fruits, jams, sauerkraut, and pickles. These foods are higher in acid. We can also process tomatoes in a boiling water canner by adding acid to them. Acids that will work include vinegar, bottled lemon juice, or citric acid. To have a safe product, always check to see what the current recommendations are for preparing the food, the canning procedure, adding acid, and the processing time. Find up-to-date research-tested recipes at food.unl.edu or contact your local Nebraska Extension office for more information. Another good resource is the National Center for Home Food Preservation website at the University of Georgia. Boiling water canners are large pots with removable racks and fitted lids. The canner must be deep enough so that at least 1 to 2 inches of briskly boiling water will be over the tops of the jars during processing. The bottom of the boiling water canner is either flat or rigid. To heat properly, it is important to match the canner to the stove top. On a gas burner, either a flat or ridged bottom can be used. On an electric range, a flat bottom canner gives more even heat. Also, on an electric range, the canner should be no more than 4 inches wider than the element on which it is heated. That is to ensure uniform processing. Center the canner so not more than 2 inches extend beyond the burner on any side. Before canning on a smooth top range, check the manufacturer's instructions on suitability for canning and recommended maximum canner size for specific burners. A flat bottom canner must be used on a smooth top range. As we are getting ready to start, I have some tips for a successful canning experience. Always use jars that are designed for home canning. Check the jars for nicks or cracks, and do not use jars with the nicks or cracks for canning. Always use a new, flat metal lid. These lids have a colored gasket compound that will soften and form an airtight seal to the jar. It is best to purchase lids new every year. Use a ring, also called a screw band, to hold the lid in place while it is processing. A ring can be reused and should be easy to put on the jar. Do not use rings that are rusty or bent. Before starting, read all instructions. Clear and clean your workspace, gather supplies, and wash your hands. There are tools that will make canning easier. They include a jar lifter to lift hot jars in and out of the boiling water canner. A bubble freer. You can purchase a canning bubble freer or use a plastic or silicone knife. Never use a metal knife as it could scratch the glass and weaken the jar. The canning bubble freer also has a headspace measurer on it. This is handy when filling jars with food. A canning funnel. It helps the food go into the jar. Don't forget some common kitchen equipment, such as a timer to keep track of the processing time, ladle, hot pads, clean dishcloths, towel or cooling rack, knives, and cutting boards. If you are canning at an elevation of 1,000 feet or higher, most canning recipes need to be adjusted. With boiling water canning, we adjust the recipe with adding more time. We need to change it because water boils at a lower temperature at higher elevations. Most of Nebraska is above 1,000 feet. With all home canning, when we are done and have the jars sitting cooling after they have been processed, we want to hear the ping of the jar making a vacuum and sealing. A sealed jar just means you pushed air out of the jar and the lid pulled down tight. To have a safe product in the jar, you need to follow an up-to-date, research-tested recipe and have the jar seal. Follow these steps for successful boiling water canning. Fill the canner half full with water. Place the canner rack in the bottom of the canner. Preheat water to 140 degrees for raw packed foods or to 180 degrees for hot packed foods. Heat clean jars in water by either placing them in the canner as it is warming up or place jars in hot water in a clean sink, tub, or a large pot. Another way to heat the jars is by running them through the dishwasher. While the canner water is heating, prepare the food using an up-to-date, research-tested recipe. Fill jars with food, remove air bubbles, and leave the correct headspace. Headspace is the space between the top of the food and the top of the jar. A bubble freer is a great tool to check for correct headspace. Wipe jar rim with a damp cloth to assure no food is on the rim. Place canning lid on the jar rim. Screw the band in place until finger tight. Do not over-tighten. Finger tight means the screw band is secure, but not squeezing the lid. This allows the air to escape while the jar and contents are heating, but keeps the lid close enough to the jar to allow the sealing compound to seal after the jar comes out of the canner. Fill the canner as jars become filled with food. Use a jar lifter positioned below the neck of the jar, keeping the jar upright at all times. Filled jars can be directly loaded when the rack is positioned on the bottom of the canner. Or secure the rack on the canner rib, load the filled jars, then use the rack handles to lower the rack with jars into the water. Add more very hot water if needed so the water level is at least 1 to 2 inches above the jars when they are loaded. Cover with the canner lid. Turn heat to its highest position until the water boils vigorously. Once the water is boiling, set a timer for the recommended time required for processing the food. Keep the canner lid on the canner and lower the heat setting to maintain a gentle boil throughout the process. If the water stops boiling at any time during the process, turn the heat up, bring the water back to a vigorous boil, and begin the process time all over again. For longer processing times, have a small pot with boiling water on the side, so you can add more boiling water if needed to keep the water level above the jars. When jars have boiled for the recommended processing time, turn off the heat and remove the canner lid. Wait 5 minutes before removing the jars. Using a jar lifter, remove the jars one at a time, being careful not to tilt the jars. Place them on a towel or a rack, leaving at least 1 inch space between the jars during cooling. Avoid placing the jars on a cold surface or in a cold draft. Do not tighten lid ring bands or push down on the center of the flat metal lid. Allow jars to sit undisturbed while they cool, 12 to 24 hours. Check to see that the center of the metal lids have pulled down and that the lids are firmly in place. Label with the product name and date. If you have any questions on home food preservation, contact your local Nebraska Extension office or check online at food.unl.edu.